What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Tattooed Angler here, and I'm going to give you guys an in-depth explanation on what to look for and what to use and everything to do for the essentials of fishing from the bank for crappie. So I'm going to give you guys some lures, I'm going to give you guys some suggestions for jig heads, and just all in all information on how to locate and catch crappie from the bank. Stick with me, stay tuned. Now, crappie fishing is a very, very, very complex way of fishing. It might not seem like it because it's just a panfish, but there are so many techniques and so many ways and so many colors and so many lures for crappie fishing. I like to stick to just a handful of rules when I'm crappie fishing from the bank. The first one that I do, number one, is that I check my depth of the water. Now, one thing that you truly have to know about crappie fishing, even if you're a beginner or advanced, is that they suspend and they change depths. So I try to focus on depth more than anything. I try to see, especially if it's a new piece of water, I will try to test out the waters by throwing out a jig head and letting it fall to the bottom, and I'll count. And I'll judge by whatever size jig head that I have, however long it takes to fall to the bottom, a rough estimate on what the depth is. And from then on, whatever lure or jig or whatever I have thrown into the water, I'll start working it slowly. I mean slow, 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 slow. Crappie also eat up. They eat upwards. So when I slowly reel it in, it rises in the water column. I might be getting right up above a crappie's head, and then that magical thump happens. So I always try to look for depth, literally the first thing that I do when I crappie fish, and go from there. All right, number two. The number two thing that I look for when I first step out on the water to crappie fish is structure. We're talking about laydowns and brush piles. If those are accessible from the bank, do it. Cast over there. The laydown is farther out, will depend on what I would use. If it's a method where I have to cast over by some, like a brush pile and whatnot, I'm gonna go under a bobber. I'm immediately go under a bobber just because I want to see that bite, even if I'm like barely moving it. One other useful tip that I use, and a lot of people I would believe they use this too, is that I cast into the wind. So whatever the direction of the wind is, I cast into it. The reason why I do that is because that wind kicks up everything and pulls bait fish. It blows bait fish around, and bait fish, they're not as strong as, a normal size crappie or anything. So, like minnows and everything else, the food source that crappie eat blows with the wind. So crappie they're kind of a lazy fish. So with that being said, they want to do as less work as possible. They're not going to come, they'll chase, but they're not going to be chasing like that. So, if the winds are blowing towards you, they can just sit there and open their mouth pretty much, and, dinner is served. Another thing that I like to follow, I do not ever, 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 ever in my whole 20-some years of knowing how to crappie fish, have I ever, ever, ever went over 1/8 of an ounce jig head. There's no need for it. I usually go in between 1/80th of an ounce and 1/8. I have never used a 1/4 ounce jig head. There's no need for it. It's a panfish. You want to get down fast, but they also, you could twitch it in front of their face and sometimes they won't even do anything. They'll just look at it. So, you don't want to spook them off or anything. You want to try to be as stealth as possible. It's using light wire hooks. This one right here has a sickle hook on it. It's a 1/8 ounce jig head, red eye, and chartreuse with a black top on the head, if you can see that. I like to use that one a lot. But yeah, I usually go in between 1/80th of an ounce to 1/8 of an ounce. My favorite would probably potentially be the 1/16th, at least from the bank. I can combat it with the wind. If it's blowing towards me, I can combat it more. And if I'm going from the bank, I don't want to cast too far out to where I don't feel the bite and not be able to hook up when a fish strikes. So another tip that I would say would be stay under an eighth of an ounce. Don't go any more than an eighth of an ounce when you're crappie fishing. Another useful tip that you could use from the bank that I use, well, I kind of use it anywhere for actually any fish, is look for boils. Look for boils and swirls in the water. That shows that something is swimming around there. And chances are, with the time of year it is, crappie do push up close. So, they're a lot more accessible in the fall than they would be in the summer. The summer they like to stay more deep and then in the cooler water. But once the water temperatures drop, then they start moving their way up in the fall. So, what you want to do is just look for swirls or even blow ups. Like bass could be blowing up on crappie. So, that's a telltale sign that that's where those crappie are. Another thing that I make sure that I do when I'm crappie fishing from the bank is that I make sure that my knots are secure, okay? So I only use two different knots for crappie fishing. One of them being the Palomar knot, which is universal. You can get on anybody's YouTube and learn how to tie a Palomar knot, or a loop knot. Loop knot is what I use usually during windy days because it acts or not mild windy days. So anything in between like 5 to 15, I will use a loop knot. Make sure that your knot is cinched down good because the thump of crappie, I've tied bad knots, and the thump of crappie, just that one single thump, when you feel that initial thump, it has unhooked. So I've tied bad knots and I've lost some pretty decent crappie on not tying a good knot. So always make sure that you have a good knot tied. Whichever one that you prefer. Like I said, I prefer either the Palomar or the loop knot. Loop knot only primarily for the action that it gives the baits. There's other YouTube videos on that as well. But yeah, those are the only two knots that I use when I'm fishing from the bank for crappie. Okay, so there are two ways that I fish from the bank for crappie. One of them is that I use a jig head and then some type of soft plastic. So with that being said, I'm just going to pick this up. This right here is the Mr. Crappie Slabalicious 2-inch paddle tail by Strike King. I like this during windy days. I would probably use this in I don't know, maybe like not so clear water, maybe technically tannic. I would use this color possibly. Or I go under a bobber with a soft plastic. I usually go under a bobber with a soft plastic when the bite is tough and I'm trying to just put it in something's face. Because if it's right there in front of a crappie's face, and especially if they see it upwards, they're going to hit it. It just depends on what twitch and tweak. And crappie are very specific fish. No matter how lazy they seem, they are lazy, but they are also very specific to what they like. So I like to use this bobber when I go under a bobber. It's called the Rod and Bob's bobber. It is a three-way bobber. So okay, so it can be a slip bobber. It's a way you can tie it off right here, or you can put it on that end. So you got either slip bobber, you can put it here or here, and it's a weighted bobber. So I can throw, I could tie on like a 1/80th or a 1/64th ounce jig head under it with a Bobby Garland and be able to work it just fine. There are some instances where I use slip bobbers, just normal, styrofoam slip bobbers, but other than that, I don't really like using other bobbers. This is just top notch to me. I mean, they're pretty expensive, but they're also worth it. It's like two for like $5, but it's also a balsa wood, and there's three different ways to use this bobber. So other than that, those are the two ways that the two methods I like to use to crappie fish from the bank. All right, so we're going to talk about the three main lures that I use, the three soft plastics. You just seen one of them. That's the Slabalicious right here. Okay, so number two, I like to use the Crappie Magnet. There's different variations of this, different colors and stuff, but mainly it's got the two little kickers that are chartreuse, and then the top half of it is usually a different color, whatever color you want. They got black, pink, white, green. You know, they got so many different colors. The black and chartreuse gets it done for me in muddy water, like muddy cloud. It's a cloudy day, muddy. I mean, this gets it done. And what's weird about it is that I will pair it up completely with a hot pink jig head. So this is a 1/16 ounce jig head from Eagle Claw. It's got the sickle hook on it. I really love 1/16 ounce, like I was explaining earlier. Yeah, I would just pair this up, just put it on. Okay. So you'll take that and you'll run it through. It's kind of a long hook, but you can make do with it. It'll still work. Okay. There we go. That right there in some muddy water. If you find them, you're going to wear them out. All right, so we're going to get to the OG. We're going to get to the OG crappie bait, and that is the Bobby Garland. This one just happens to be mayfly color because crappie like to eat insects and stuff. So yeah, this one's a mayfly color. I do really good with this in like tannic water. I'll usually put like a chartreuse jig head on the end of it or a pink jig head, you know, just because it's tannic. The clear water, I usually use like a lead head. Okay, so when I like to fish from the bank for crappie and I don't want to use a bobber, like I said, I'll use a straight up jig head. All right, so I'll use this 1/8 ounce. We're just going to use this 1/8 ounce jig head as an example, sickle hook. I'm a real big fan of sickle hooks. For some reason, I just feel like I can get the hook out easier whenever I hook them. But yeah, I'll just swim a Slabalicious. We're going to put this on here just like this. Slide it up. Get it to the bottom of the tail. Flip it around. Bing, bang, boom. You got some delicious, delicious, delicious Slabalicious right there. This right here catches big crappie no matter what. I mean, this thing is top notch. Different variations of color of the Slabalicious depend on, like I said, the watercolor. I like the pink. I like the orange. I like the red. This one right here is Monkey Shine. I got Refrigerator White. I got Who Dat. That is probably one of my top baits that I use. Not even just for crappie. It just mimics a small bait fish so well. And with the different colors and variations of it, I mean, it catches some slabs. I've caught some slabs with the paddle tail right there. Well, guys, that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for today's episode. Those are the things that I like to do when I crappie fish from the bank, and that's what I feel and what deems me successful. I've used other methods. There's other baits and stuff that I use for certain situations and whatnot, but you know, just from the get-go, once I step onto the bank and I'm going for crappie, that is originally what I do. And I hope my tips and tricks help you guys out to be more successful on the water. And if you like what you see, please make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you aren't subscribed already. And then also don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can get notifications of your boy, Mr. Tattooed Angler. But I want to go use these tips and tricks of my own on the water. So I'll see you guys out on the next one. Peace.